Welcome to the RunningDrummer.com podcast with your host, the man who puts the rhythm into running, Greg Santini.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to RunningDrummer.com podcast. This is your host, Greg Santini. Welcome to podcast numero uno. This is my first attempt at a podcast, so hopefully I don't go down in flames. RunningDrummer.com is brought to you. Got to bring up our sponsors first and foremost. We're brought to you by Comlink Total Solutions. Check them out at comlinkbundle.com. That's comlinkbundle.com. They're your one-stop shop for all your telecommunication needs. They can hook you up, people. They work with all major carriers. AT&T, DirecTV, CenturyLink, Spectrum, Frontier, HughesNet, Viasat, Windstream, Comcast Xfinity, you name it, they got it. Why would anyone call a carrier directly to listen to their spiel about how great their service is when you could call Comlink and you could find out in one phone call what you need to know, what the prices are in your area, what's available in your area, what you can get. Don't leave it up to the carrier itself. Call Comlink. It's pretty much like Expedia or Travelocity, guys. That's how they work. They give you an unbiased stance on telecommunications. They also do home security. They do it through ADT, the most recognized and well-known name in home security. They work with residential customers. They work with commercial customers. They work with everybody. So give them a call. The number to call is 1-800-590-0618 or visit them at comlinkbundle.com. Thank you, Comlink, for your kind services and what you do. It's a great service. Currently, you're our only sponsor, so I appreciate all the help. My name again, Greg Santini. RunningDrummer.com is the website. RunningDrummer.com podcast is the podcast. I decided to make Running Drummer, and I'm just going to give you a quick, brief synopsis since this is episode numero uno, why I'm doing this. Why would you do this? Well, number one, I love running. Huge runner, love to run. I've run marathons, ultra marathons. I run pretty much every day. So why not talk about it? I love talking about it. I love teaching people about running. My favorite thing to do is disproving people when I tell them how much I run. They go, "Oh, you're going to hurt your knees. You're going to hurt your back." No, you're not actually. If you run properly, you will actually not do that. So that's incorrect. Anyway, that's one of the reasons. Also, I just love to help people. I love to try to give people good advice, things that work for me. Not to say that they might work for you, but, talk to me. We'll try to figure out a plan to help you out. I do this for free. You can email me at gregtherunningdrummer@gmail.com, or you can also email me directly at gregsantini@yahoo.com. Either one, or you can connect with me on Facebook. You can look me up on Facebook at runningdrummer.com or Running Drummer. Just type that in the search bar on Facebook and you'll find us. The other reason I decided to do this was because, obviously, I love to play drums. I've been playing drums for roughly the better part of 30 years. I started playing when I was around 7 or 8 years old. I'm currently 38. So there you go. I did the math on that. I'm not incredibly good at math, which is ironic because I'm a drummer and I should be better. But I'm much better at fractions nowadays because of drumming. But anyway, I love drumming. I love talking to musicians. I love talking about equipment, talking about styles, talking about famous drummers, how they've influenced people, how they keep the band together. I just love drums. Everything drums. I'm into it. So if you're into drums, into music, into running or exercise, this is a podcast for you because I plan on having some awesome people on this podcast. People that will influence you and motivate you, people that will inspire you. That's what we're looking for. And we have lots of people. So we've already lined up quite a few interviews for the future, which I'm really excited about. Today's first interview, however, is going to be with my oldest brother, Mike Santini, who lives in New Zealand, Blenheim, New Zealand, if you know where that is. It's so far away. If it was any further away, it would actually be closer. So think about that. Once you pass Blenheim and continue to move on, you're actually going back the other way. You're actually coming around the earth. That's how far away it is. So, reason I'm interviewing Mike, talk a little bit about our family. I'm one of 4 boys in my family. Matt, Mike, Chris. They're all older than me. I'm the baby. Mike is the oldest. Mike and I are sort of kindred spirits. We both love a lot of the same kind of music. Mike was originally a drummer. He's the person who got me into drumming, really. The reason I drum is because of Mike, so I found it appropriate to have him on the podcast first go around. So we're going to interview him, talk about his influences, what he does. Mike's a bit of an exercise guy too, so he's done some of the same. I've influenced him in that regard in life. I've shown him some things and influenced him and motivated him to do accomplish some things, which I'm pretty proud of. So yeah, so that's what it's all about, guys. It's about helping people, helping you, and then discussing cool topics like drums and music. So without further ado, I'll just give a really quick brief history of where I come from and what I've accomplished in my life. Like I said before, I'm a marathoner, ultra marathoner, but I wasn't always that. I didn't start out that way, obviously. So originally I was born in New York, Mineola, New York, Nassau County. What up? I moved to Fort Myers, Florida, Lehigh Acres area when I was about 7 years old. Started playing drums very soon after. Stole my brother Mike's drum set, essentially, which we'll get into. Then started playing music with friends, and that's where I really learned how to hone my craft, was playing with friends and playing in a band in high school, middle school, high school. Played with a bunch of really awesome guys. A guy named Kenny Perkins, who was an amazing guitar player, got me into all kinds of heavy metal, Megadeth, Metallica. I got into Rush, obviously. My son's name is Neil, if that's any indication on how much of into Rush I am. I'm a huge Neil Peart fan, and one day I will interview him on my show, that I assure you. Although he probably doesn't want to be interviewed by me, which is pretty normal. So yeah, so I did that. Played in a band called Taboo with some really great friends of mine. 2 of the guys in that band went on to become very successful musicians and doing their thing. One is Clay Parnell, who played with a band called Brothers Past. He's toured with a whole bunch of really great musicians. And also a guy named Steve Cox, who's a very good friend of mine. Big shout out to Steve Cox, anythingaudible.com. He is an amazing, he went to Berklee School of Music. He writes music for video games, for Sony. He does stuff for the NFL. He does all kinds of stuff. He's a composer, guitar player, keyboard player, singer. This guy does everything. He's an incredible musician. Very good friend of mine. I will absolutely have him on the show, and we will discuss lots of cool topics. Great friend of mine. So yeah, so then I joined the military at 17, left everything behind. That's where I basically started my running career. Got into running, obviously because of the military. I had no choice. Had to run. Joined the 82nd Airborne right after I got out of boot camp. I went straight to airborne school, and I was assigned to the 82nd Airborne Division, where I continued to run. I got pretty good at it. And then I took the fire department test in 1999. Subsequently was hired in 2003. So I continued to run, getting ready for the academy. Continued to take that very serious. And then got into the fire academy, where I really learned about fitness from my lieutenant there, who was the head of the fitness unit, Lieutenant Mike Casciola, who I will try to have on the show as well. Retired now, but one of the smartest, most excellent fitness teachers that anyone could ever have, along with Lieutenant Chris Amelios, who is the Spartan god, if you will, within the fire department. Very famous, awesome motivator, the most incredible motivator I've ever met in my life, and that's compared to some amazing drill sergeants that I had in the military. Lieutenant Chris Amelios, they call him Crazy Pete, is literally the most unbelievable motivator you'll ever know. Just incredible. Great speeches, just, chills down your spine kind of guy. I subsequently ended up working for them years later in my fire department career. I was very honored to become a part of the FDNY fitness unit at the fire academy and get to train people myself underneath their wing, which was great. And I've worked with the most amazing, most fit, incredible people when I was there. It was literally one of the best times I've ever had. in the fire department. It was incredible. Like family, those guys, just great people, and talented, man. Holy cow, just holy smokes. Everyone had a talent. Everyone was great. So skipping back a little bit again, I didn't really run a lot until I was later on, like really get into running until I met with my lieutenant at my firehouse. His name was Scott Cassis, Lieutenant Scott Cassis, in 119 Truck, Hooper Street, Brooklyn. He was an ultramarathon runner. He's the one who got me into it. Incredible guy. Couldn't believe what he was doing. Didn't understand it. I had never even run a marathon at that point. At that point, I had just come off of doing P90X because I had fallen out of shape for a little while. Didn't work out for 6 months and got really out of shape. And then I did P90X, which is incredible. If you've never done it, just another great workout. I still incorporate it in my workouts now. That's how good it is. Tony Horton, incredible, motivator as well. So yeah, so I got into that, and then I met Scott, and then Scott got me into ultra running. We did our first 50K, and I had never run over like 15 miles at that point. And he said, just go for it. And I said, all right. So we went for it, and I ran, and I ended up doing pretty decent. And I learned that I actually have a pretty good knack for this stuff. And I think running is just a great metaphor for life. It's ups and downs. There are multiple walls, especially in marathon and ultra marathon running. There's many, many walls that you'll experience. There's so many videos online now that you can watch about ultra marathon running and just incredible people and incredible stories. So you don't need me to tell you that. So go look it up. Just go onto YouTube and start typing in ultra marathon. You'll find some amazing people. But Scott got me into a book called The Ultra Marathon Man, written by a guy named Dean Karnazes, who is one of the most well-respected ultramarathon runners in the world, and also not because he's the fastest guy and broke every record or whatever. He's won races, obviously, but it's not about speed with Dean. I think Dean really brought the ultramarathon running world to the forefront. He's the spokesperson, basically, for the sport. He works with North Face and does all the endurance challenges. I actually got to meet him on one of those endurance challenges. He was incredibly nice, just down-to-earth guy, very, very cool. So that was awesome. One of the highlights of my running career was running into him at a race. That was awesome. So yeah, just, running became a big thing. I also got into doing triathlons for a little while. I also got into bike racing. I've done, 160-mile bike rides. I've ridden from my bike from Manhattan to Montauk multiple times. Montauk is very far away if you're not in New York, but it's quite a ways away. It's basically the entire length of Long Island. So that was, I've done some really cool things in my life, in my career, my exercise career, if you will. So I'm really proud of a lot of it, and people think I'm crazy, and I go to work and I run on the treadmill half the day, and every morning everyone in my firehouse can attest to there's one place you can guarantee that you're going to find me, and that's at 6:30 or 7 in the morning. You will see me. If I'm at work, you will see me in the gym on the treadmill, or working out, doing pull-ups, or doing calisthenics and yoga, which I will get into because I'm a huge yoga person now. I was not a big yoga guy until the last, year or so. I really got into it. I think it's really important. It's something that people neglect, not just for your body, but for your mind, body, and soul. I think it's really important. So anyway, that's the gist of it, guys. I'm really excited about this podcast. I'm really excited to talk to older brother Mike here coming up, tell you a little bit more about my background, my story. We're going to try to keep these podcasts to an hour long if possible. We'll try to edit them down as much as possible, so you can listen to them in the car and get some cool advice and listen to some really inspirational people. And of course, also talk about music and drums, of course, with an influence on drums, and talk about music that has influenced you, and even talk about how music influences your workouts, how it influences my workouts and what I listen to while I'm working out and stuff like that. So that's basically the gist of this podcast. So I'm really excited about it. So without further ado, let's get with Mike from Blenheim, New Zealand. All right, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, we finally were able to get in touch with older brother Mike in Blenheim, New Zealand. Mike, welcome. Welcome to the Running Drummer podcast.
I'm glad to be here, and as Greg said, I am in New Zealand, and that is about as far away as you can get from the United States until you start getting closer again.
Right.
Live in wine country of the South Island of New Zealand in Blenheim. So I've been here for a few years. Lived in Australia before that. But yeah, I'm very glad to be part of the podcast.
I was able to visit you there one time, and I wish I could be there more, but it is quite a distance. And I will say it is one of the most incredible places that I've ever been to. But I'm sure when you live there, I'm sure that it gets a little old after a while, just being out in, no man's land.
Yeah, the varnish does wear off after a few years. So
right. It'd be cool. It'd be cool to live on the moon, but then after a week, it would be like
after about a week, you kind of.
I'm living on the fucking moon. It's time to go back to Earth now.
My mother comes to visit me once a year, and of course, Greg and his wife Heather came down for my wedding to my ex-wife, and we, it's a 24-hour plane ride, so that's a big ask. So I try to get over to the States as much as I can.
Yeah, it took me 36 hours to get there, and when I got there, half the plane that I was the people that we were with, there was 3 people that died on the plane. So a whole and then someone was born on the plane. It was a whole life cycle happened.
Right, exactly.
And yeah, it's an amazing trip, everyone.
Yeah, definitely.
But anyway, so that's a little bit, so Mike is my oldest brother. Mike is 9 years older than me. He's been a tremendous influence on me when it comes to music, when it comes to, my humor, everything kind of spawns from Mike. And I've, of course, I think influenced him in some ways as well. But Mike, if you want to tell some of the people out there, what were your biggest influences when it comes to playing drums, right? So Mike was the only reason I started playing drums. So I want to ask Mike, what were his influences when before Greg was born? What did you listen to? Who were you listening to? Did mom and dad influence you into some music, certain types of genres and stuff like that? And what was the catalyst that made you pick up drumsticks?
Our parents are baby boomers. So they grew up in the 50s and 60s as kids and teenagers. And so by the time I came around in 1971, the music scene was vinyl. And my parents had a very elaborate collection of vinyl records that spun many different genres. And the genres that I picked up on were number one, the Beatles and Elvis Presley, I would say, more so the Beatles. They had every single album that the Beatles had at the time. I would just spend hours in front of this record player that we had, and I would just go through all of the genres. I mean, Creedence Clearwater Revival, Led Zeppelin, the Beatles. But I really honed in on the Beatles, and I think the song that influenced me to want to pick up the sticks would have been Paperback Writer, and I'm sure everybody out there knows that song. If not, listen to it, because it's an excellent it's an excellent piece, and it really just has a drum line that is unlike a lot of the other Beatles songs. And I was watching actually some interviews with some of the bigger drummers out there in the drum world today, and they were honoring Ringo Starr, and they all sat down in front of his Ludwig drum set, the kit that he played, and they demonstrated why Ringo Starr was an influential drummer to most drummers out there, because of obviously the incredible fame the Beatles had, and they really got into explaining Ringo Starr's drum style and how it was very unique, and it was almost like a completely new technique that had never been out there before. So when we had these listening sessions, I sat down and listened to these songs. I got the bug up my butt. I wanted to play. And so my parents, allowed me to join the school band that I had. And my first drum set, quite honestly, was the drum pad, the little piece of wood with the rubber on it. You play the school songs and that sort of thing. But I really wanted to play a real set. And as I got older into my teens, started listening to other bands like U2, The Cure, some of the more progressive style of music. And then the band Rush was introduced to me by my cousin Billy Kearns and my cousin Michael Kearns, who also incidentally is a fantastic drummer. And so eventually my mother was able to get together some money for a gift to buy me an old used Ludwig drum set, not very much unlike the one Ringo Starr used in his early days. I started playing it, but it was a very rudimentary set. It didn't have any cymbals. I actually had to use the rim of the snare drum as my hi-hat, and I would play it in my room listening to the songs I liked at the time, whether it be Rush, whether it be the Beatles, whether it be The Cure, so on and so forth. And at that time, Greg was, I was in my teens. Greg was, 9, 10, 11, 12 in that area. And being a teenager, I liked privacy, and, my things were my things, and I didn't want anybody touching them. And when I would go off to school, or I'd be coming back from school, or going off somewhere to work or whatever, Greg would sneak into the room and play the drums, and I'd be pulling back up in the driveway on my return. He'd come, I'd hear him, and he'd hear me pull up. He'd run out, and I'd have words with him. I'd say, "Stay off my drum set." But after a while, I could hear he was getting really good, and I'm like, why am I not encouraging him to play as opposed to telling him to get off my lawn, so to speak? And Greg then really took it on, and I eventually gave up playing. I had other teenage concerns like females and things like that. So I wasn't playing much anymore. And so eventually I just gave the set to Greg, and he was able to modify it, and he eventually did get some cymbals and started playing. But
yes, I did.
You did, absolutely did. But that's when I introduced Greg to the songs from the Beatles and Rush. And,
I think that makes a really good point too about Ringo Starr, and not to Ringo Starr is obviously everyone's first initial love as a drummer, because it's the Beatles, and if you don't like the Beatles, there's usually something wrong with you.
Yes,
you must have a brain damage. But they just setting aside all the nonsense that people talk about the Beatles and say, oh, they didn't write they didn't write some of their music, and blah blah blah, and they ripped off old blues and old R&B stuff, and that's probably true in some respects, but whatever. I mean, they were the freaking Beatles, man.
It's true of most beginning rock and roll bands. They all ripped off old black soul music, basically.
Right, but the good point about that is when you talk about drummers like Ringo Starr that are pretty simple for the most part, and playing 4/4 time and just keeping a simple beat. You look at people like Meg White, from the White Stripes, who is an extremely simple drummer, but Meg White sounds like Meg White, and nobody else can sound like Meg White. So
right.
That in and of itself is something to be said, and you can talk all this crap you want about Meg White as a drummer. She's not a technical drummer. She doesn't, but she plays for the effing White Stripes. What have you done?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, what the hell? What are you doing? Like, who are you to say anything about Meg White? So, she's influenced. I mean, if anything, you can say, hey, look, at least Meg White has gotten a bunch of people who maybe they're great drummers now, but maybe in the beginning when they heard Meg White, they're like, hey, I can do that, and they start playing, and the next thing you know, they listen to the next, the Ringo Starr, and then they go up to the next drummer, and eventually they end up in Neil Peart and Mike Portnoy land, and, Carter Beauford from Dave Matthews, and these other really super technical, amazing drummers. But you don't just get there, you don't just start out listening to Rush and say, hey, I'm just going to play Rush, and it's not going to work that way. It's good. If anything, it would discourage you, because you can't pull those chops off, and the next thing you know, you'll be like, screw this, I'm not doing this. This sucks, So I encourage everyone, if you're a drummer, a beginning drummer, to just listen to the basics and listen to the simple drummers out there, and then start to build your repertoire from there.
I would say if you're a beginning drummer, I think there's a certain repertoire. There should be a certain like when you go to school and you're going to learn about history, you have to pick up certain books and certain core curriculum things, And for drumming, I think number one on the list of core curriculum should be Rush's Moving Pictures album.
Right.
Because whether you like their style of music or not really isn't the point. It really is listening to how Neil Peart lays down some of the most awe-inspiring, perfect drum lines you'll ever hear in your life. And I know when I introduced that album to Greg in the car in my 1990 Ford Escort GT, which I thought was the coolest car, had a decent stereo in it. I put the album in, I put the cassette in there, and turned it all the way up. Greg listened to it. Next thing you know, he's tapping on the dashboard and he's following along. So
yeah, I'm pretty sure that was the first time I'd ever had my mind completely blown, was when I listened to the opening note to Tom Sawyer from Rush's Moving Pictures. It was so incredibly powerful, that an opening note that changed my entire life. I mean, I think that solidified the fact that I knew from then on that I was going to play drums forever. Like, I'm going to play drums until I'm dead,
Here's something about that too, and that is the thing with Rush is because Neil's drumming in that is so powerful and such an explosive part of the song. To be honest with you, because he had so much to it. There were years where I didn't know any of the lyrics to any of the songs because I was just listening along. I knew the sounds that were coming out of the mouth of the singing, but I didn't really understand the lyrics, and I was too much with too much influence from the drumming. It was just, that was what I heard more than anything else. And I also say the same thing with Led Zeppelin. And the reason why I bring that up is because I've only recently started listening to Led Zeppelin again. I always used to as a kid, but again, wasn't really paying attention to lyrics because the drumming was so powerful. But I recently was listening to one of the greatest hits albums from Led Zeppelin recently on a 4-hour car trip I was taking to a friend of mine, my friend Julian and Gray Mouse, if you're listening. It's actually his album. I stole it from him. But I was listening to and I'm feeling silly. I don't remember the title of the song off the top of my head.
No,
the Immigrant Song.
We can edit it. Don't worry.
Yeah, we can edit that. But that being said, I only recently found out they had a whole song that sang about the Lord of the Rings. I had no idea when he was talking about he's from Mordor, and he was talking about Gollum and the ring and this sort of thing. I was like, wait a minute, they were singing about Lord of the Rings here. That for 30 years I've just been listening to the song, only listening to the drum lines.
Right.
But that just demonstrates how powerful drumming can be. I mean, when you have the talent that these guys have, they pretty much overshadow everybody else.
Right.
So yeah, and then and most recently, my favorite band is Foo Fighters. I really enjoy their music style. I think they for a long time they're one of the most underrated rock bands of all time. Now they've reached a pretty pinnacle success. I think they're universally recognized as awesome. Taylor Hawkins, the drummer for that band, is a fantastic drummer. He's unbelievable. And I think initially he stood in the shadow of, of the fact that, Foo Fighters was started by the drummer of Nirvana, who also is a fantastic drummer.
Dave Grohl, obviously.
Dave Grohl. He's multi-talented, but he's come to his own. His drumming is fantastic. So, as time goes on, years go by, you feel like, oh my God. I mean, now when I listen to the Foo Fighters, I want to pick up the sticks again, but I'm so motor skill deficient in drumming now that I wouldn't be able to hold a riff for more than a minute or two. But so that's kind of where that went. And once Greg started getting into this drumming, he really took off, and that's when he met up with his friend Kenny Perkins, who is a really good guitarist, and these guys were 12, 13 at the time, and they started this band called the Assassins, and they would play local talent shows and things around Lehigh Acres, Florida, which is one of the Lehigh Acres at the time was like a little hamlet. It was nothing, but they played around, and then eventually he met his friends through high school, and Steve Cox and a couple of other guys, and they started another band called Taboo, and they actually recorded. I actually became a roadie for their band for a short period of time when they would do some of the club tours that they did around Fort Myers, Florida. They had an excellent sound, highly influenced by, at the time, I would say, there'd be several different influences on you guys, but I'd say one of the bigger ones would have been the heavy metal genre.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I think one of the major influences on us at the time, in the beginning, was definitely heavy metal. I mean, we were very much into, Metallica, Megadeth.
Yeah, Metallica.
And then we kind of we had we started. Then we got into Faith No More, which is still to this day one of my favorite all-time bands, and very much underrated when it comes to musicianship and what they're doing and the kind of stuff that's going on there. They have an incredible band, and just everything they do is amazing. Everything that Faith No More comes up with, in my opinion, is far beyond what other people are doing nowadays, and what has been done. And then Taboo ended up getting into a lot of the the Fish and the Grateful Dead, and then Jam. So we became kind of a weird band because we were very eclectic. We were playing a lot of jammy type stuff, but with the heavy riffs to it, which is kind of where I still lie. And if I was going to form a new band, that's what I would do. It would be a heavy.
Well, I think, Greg,
heavy Fish band.
What I think you need to do is lay down a couple of Taboo tracks to show the guys out there what you started off sounding like.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. And I'll have it all on my website. So just so you guys know, runningdrummer.com is the website. Go check it out, which I have a lot of really cool stuff on there. I've been building the site, and I don't think I've told you, Mike, there's a lot of new stuff on there you got to check out. It's really cool. Some cool videos of David Goggins, who's this crazy Navy SEAL guy, who I love. It's a lot of workout stuff, which kind of brings me up to the next point, which is, so Mike and I joined the military. So I'm going to jump ahead into past the music stuff. So the music stuff didn't quite pan out for me when I was, 17 or 18 years old. So I joined the military because I really had no other choice. Not that I didn't have a choice, but I wanted to. And I was very excited to do it. And mainly because I was the first one of all my grandfather's grandkids to join the military. So I was excited to do that, to kind of impress him.
And of course, throughout high school, you were in the ROTC program.
Right, and in high school, I was one of those nerdy ROTC people that walked around in a green uniform all the time, which I'm extremely proud of, because I'm still, my good friends, the only great friend that I have a lot of good friends from high school, but one of my really good friends from high school, one of them was an ROTC guy, Eric Hansen, who I'm still very good friends with. And lifelong friends, and just a good guy, and it's great. He just had his daughter just graduated high school, which is really frightening. But wow. Yeah, crazy. Jeez. They had kids right after. They literally had a kid right after high school. But so I'm not that old, everybody. But yeah, so it's been a while since I graduated. 20 years to be exact. But anyway,
did he join the military too?
No, he did not. No, he was very close to doing it. He got into the Air Force, I believe ROTC in college, and then he life got in the way. She got pregnant, and then they had their kid, and it was like, all right, now he's got to get a job. So, but anyway, yeah. So it was. I joined the military early on. I was out the door at 17. My mom had to sign me up. That's how young I was at the time. And then I had to learn how to run. I had to run because.
Well, let me jump in, because you got to preface this with the fact that when Greg joined the military, he was 17 years old, so he wasn't actually of legal age. So what happened was, Greg was on the the deferred enlistment program, which means you could join as a junior in high school, and providing you finish out your high school and get your diploma, you will then enter basic training pretty much after graduation. Now, when Greg joined, as a 17-year-old, he was a little tiny, scrawny kid.
Right. I weighed 100.
None of us. Yeah, you were.
I weighed 117 pounds, soaking wet.
And you're about 5'6" or 7, right?
Yeah, I'm 5'7".
So he's 5'7", 117. That's cool if you're a chick, but not if
or if you're a jockey for a horse. That's pretty good too.
Yeah, that's good. That'd have been great if you went that route. But so Greg joined, and he went in as a petroleum supply specialist, which basically means he refueled helicopters. and they had a program where
I got into armament as well, so I was also refueling and rearming helicopters. That's what I did.
And as you know, and as both Greg and I know, it doesn't really matter what your MOS is. You're going to be doing a lot of the same shit that a lot of other people are doing because it's a big moving green machine. So you're going to paint rocks, you're going to pick up cigarette butts, you're going to do maintenance checks on vehicles, blah blah blah. Everybody would do that. So and anyway, Greg joined. It was my mission to get him to the gym, to put on some pounds and get some upper body strength, to get some general fitness that would be good for, getting into the military. So I basically had a year to do that. And so I, at the time, liked to go to the gym and lift weights and do all that stuff because, I wasn't in any kind of running shape. I was just a lifter. And so my other brother, Matt, also same thing at the time. And we went to the local World Gym, brought Greg in there. And I think his first workout session, he was literally bench pressing the 20-pound bar. And, we built up from there. That was his capacity. And over the course of that year, Greg got put on the weight. He got some strength, and he put on, I don't know, how many pounds did you put on, Greg?
I put on about 23 pounds, which was really hard for me to do because I was as scrawny as they get. And for me, I had to literally drink weight gainer shakes every night before bed and I was putting in way too many. I was not very smart about it. I was putting in a ton of calories that my body couldn't even process, but it was so many calories, my body was literally just shitting it all out.
and every night, since at that stage, we were all living under the same roof, at least most of us were. I remember we would take our, 9 or 10 o'clock at night trips to the Super Walmart, and we'd buy the big packet of frozen chicken breasts, for like $8 and rice.
Yeah.
And so pretty much the meals, I would prepare them. We even had the George Foreman grill when it first came out. And I'd basically just, cram chicken and rice down Greg's throat at every given, any given opportunity. You put in calories, you're going to gain weight. This is not by any means a scientific, healthy program. I don't know if we actually ate one vegetable during that whole time. Who knows? So, we were doing it by the seat of our pants. We were saying, all right, the only guidance we got was anytime I would buy one of those muscle magazines. I do remember this though, the one supplement that we took that really helped us out a lot was creatine monohydrate.
Yes.
And when that first came out, I forgot who put it out first. And of course, Metrics had come out as well. So these are supplements that when I was living in New York for a summer, for a couple of years anyway, I started working out with a world-class bodybuilder. His name is Ralph Del Giorno, and he's amazing. He's still doing it to this day, and he's, getting in the mid-40s where I am. And he introduced me to a certain style of working out, and so I came back with that and, educated Greg with that as well. And so we just kind of took it on from there. And then Greg got sent off to the military. It was summer of
1997. 1997.
Seven.
Yeah. 1997. I was out the door.
I don't forget. I'll never forget the day because I was actually living in my own apartment at the time. I went with Mom. We dropped Greg off at the recruiting station, and the bus took off. And there he was on his way to Fort Bragg because this guy, as crazy as he was, decided to go 82nd Airborne. He didn't just join the Army. He got into a program that is an elite, school you have to take after basic training. So he went and did that. And of course, we get letters back from Greg and how things were going and so on and so forth. And he met some really good guys. And he'd come down for Christmases, for his leave time. He'd come back down to Florida. Fort Bragg being not that far from Fort Myers.
12-hour drive. 12-hour drive it took me.
Yeah.
And I would drive that on a 4-day. I would drive that on a 4-day weekend. I would leave on Thursday night after work was over, and I'd get home to Fort Myers around 2 or 3 in the morning. And I remember driving. I'd be like Ace Ventura, with my head out the window, trying to stay awake the whole trip, like going through the middle of Florida, which it literally is like one of the scariest places in the world. And lots of alligators and mosquitoes. Very scary place.
But to take that into consideration, it's a long 12-hour drive. The Army training and the airborne training would have done this would be to train you for endurance. So you learn to do things you don't like to do for long periods of time because that's what you have to do in the military. He came down and he'd visit, and I started to become in awe of what he was doing. I thought what he was doing was great, and I even went to visit him a couple times at Fort Bragg. Went and partied with all his Army friends, and I was just like, wow, this is like a great family. Everyone supports each other, and blah blah blah. And Greg got something called hometown recruiting duty, where after you graduate basic training and you get to your post, you have the opportunity of taking leave to do hometown recruiting. Now, actually, I'm not exactly sure if you literally on hometown recruiting duty when I joined.
Well, it might have been. Well, it was very shortly after that. It was very shortly.
Very shortly after, yeah. But I just remember, it was shortly after. You did your 2 weeks of hometown recruiting duty. Basically, you just get to get coffee for the recruiters and, go do whatever you want to do. When I came back down from New York, where I was living at the time, I told Greg, I said, hey, I'm joining the Army. I like what you're doing. I like what I see. I want some of that,
Yep. So,
and he's like, yeah. And Greg gave me a lot of tips on what not to do and say and, all that kind of stuff, because he'd been there, done that, got the T-shirt. And I remember we came rolling into the recruiting office. Now, ironically, I became a recruiter in my Army career. But when I went inside the recruiting office with Greg knew the guys there already because he had been there on hometown recruiting. He knew the NCOs that were working there. And he went in there and basically said, hey, look, my brother, forget all the flim flam and the salesmanship. Don't worry about it. You got yourself a high school graduate with that'll score well on the ASVAB, which is the entrance exam. So you don't need to give him all this crap, So I walked in there and I just sat down. I'll never forget it. I had my first interview with the recruiter. So what do you want to do? I said, well, broadcast journalism would be great. And Greg was with me, and he's like, well, either that or chaplaincy. Because Greg's like, you want to get a sham job where you're not doing a whole lot of stuff. Get yourself into, he said, don't do 82nd Airborne.
Yeah.
He told me, don't do 11 Bravo, which is infantry. Don't do any of that other stuff.
Not to discourage people from being an infantry guy or being airborne, but it's not for everybody.
It's not for everybody. So anyway, I said, all right. That's literally, I went through the process, and I was up at the MEP station, which is the military entrance processing station in Tampa, within about 2 weeks of when I joined. And so I was technically in the Army at the time my grandfather passed away, but I hadn't reported anywhere. So when my grandfather died, he was Supreme Court Justice of the state of New York. He had a very big state funeral, and Greg was there, of course, in his dress uniform with the maroon beret, and he was a pallbearer like us. But it was just great to have that image of his. A grandson of his who my grandfather also had been in the military in World War II. So it was a nice sight to see him there like that. So I joined the Army, and Greg will tell you about his fitness regime in the 82nd Airborne. I'll let you take it over from there.
Yeah. So I mean, 82nd obviously was got pretty involved with the physical training. There was a lot of running that goes on in the 82nd. It's, you're up and down Ardennes Boulevard all the time, and all the paratroopers out there know Ardennes Boulevard, and you run a lot. You're out there, I'd say more so than what they call leg units, which are units that are not non-airborne units.
Like mine.
Like Mike's. And a lot of people, obviously, there's not many airborne units or active airborne units. The 82nd is really one of the only truly active airborne units. There's a few others overseas and stuff as well. But with that being said, it was sort of it's pretty much an elite unit. No matter what you're doing within it, you're part of this elite big thing, and it was really cool to be part of that. And it was the first time I ever thought to myself, wow, I can do something. I can really be somebody if I put my mind to it. So that was really kind of a neat thing. Then later on, when I remember going to EMT school when I was there, and I went to EMT school, and EMT school, they didn't just give that to anybody. You had to be, at least halfway intelligent and have your, shit together, or they wouldn't have sent you. So I went, I didn't have really any medical training other than the fact that I was a cadet at Immokalee Fire Department for my last year of high school, which I would be out there every week. And that's a whole nother story that I'll get into. And I give a big shout out to some of my really good friends that got me going into the fire department, which Tim Gleason, who now works for the city of Miami, and then Brian Hughes, who is also currently still a fireman in Immokalee. But anyway,
Right.
I got a little bit of training there, but I didn't get any like actual training where I was certified in any way. I was just an equipment boy, and that's what I did. A runner, if you will, like go get me that, and I would do it. But
Right.
Then when I got into 82nd, I got into this EMT school. There's a lot. The guys that were there in that EMT school were sort of not, they weren't elite, but they were like the creme de la creme of the guys there. So these guys were from their unit. These guys were handpicked by their commanders to go. So these guys were no joke, and the PT was insane. It was the craziest PT I've ever been through, and I had been through some serious PT, and I was always. Eventually, I got pretty good at running. And I was I was a relatively talented runner for someone that had virtually no experience or high school running or college running or anything.
Tell them how many miles a week you would do for PT training. Well,
I
not
think
just at the airborne school, but even at the
I think there honestly, I think we probably did, and I gotta be honest. There was probably about 4 miles a day. That was probably about the average. You wouldn't. Well, you know what? It was probably less than that. It was probably like 3 miles on the average, and then they would do 4 mile runs and 5 mile runs on Fridays. They would do like a longer run, and every once in a while they would push it and make you do like an 8 or 9 mile run. It was never really that crazy though. We never, it never really got insane, except when I was in that EMT school. Then they were doing 10 mile runs, and they were running like at a 6-minute pace. So it was. I dropped out like of half the runs. I just couldn't even keep up with them, and I thought I was pretty fit, and I was young and fit.
Compare that to what I did, because when I went in, Greg went to Fort Bragg, and we both went to the same place for basic training, Fort Jackson, South Carolina. But Greg went into Fort Bragg, and I ended up going to Germany. Now our PT we'd probably do running 3 times a week. We'd alternate it, and we would, at maximum, do a 3 mile run.
Right.
So there's a big difference in terms of mileage between what I was doing and what you were doing.
Yeah, and then sometimes it just came down to your trainer. Like who was your guy? Who was the trainer? Who was the drill sergeant? What kind of shape were they in? And if they were really in great shape, they would really push it, and really crush people. And I was lucky enough to have, through basic training, it wasn't crazy. I didn't have anything. I was able to keep up. And excel and be in like what they call the A group, which is, they have different groups of runners. So you got, A group, B group, C group, and they would, categorize you by how fast or slow you were.
Right.
So they, it was manageable. It wasn't impossible, but, you could back off and be in the D group if you were really, overweight or whatever.
And that's what I wanted to say, was that Greg had told me all about Bravo and Charlie groups would be in the running. And he'd said, look, if you don't want to be attached to the Alpha group unless you want to go crazy. And I said, oh, I really don't. I could have, but what I did was they would base where you would go based on your PT score, PT test you'd have to take. And if you ran in a certain category in terms of time, they'd put you in the group that would correspond with that. So at the time, I made sure I didn't run as fast as I could, because I didn't want to have to do those long runs. I wasn't a motivated runner, so I made sure I was a guy. But I don't want to be a disgrace, so I didn't want to be in the Delta group. I wanted to, I said, all right, I'll be good enough for C. C's good.
C's good. That's what President Bush had through his whole career in college. So
yeah, there you go.
He became president.
It's kind of like the specialist rank of running. You don't have a whole lot of responsibility, but you don't get tagged to do a lot of shit either. So So it was manageable for me. But Greg did really well, and so when he finished with the Army, ties back into music. He met some people where he was.
In the military, mind you, people found out that I was a drummer, so they said, hey, bring your drums up. We'd love to hear you play, because I would go out to a bar with my friends, and then my friends would harass the band that was playing until they let me play. And my friends were pretty imposing characters. That John Mayer, who is literally it was like hanging out with the Hulk pretty much. And he would just be like, my friend's gonna play drums, right? And they would just say, yep, sure, no problem, come on up. And I was a good drummer. So when I went up and played, I impressed the shit out of them because they said they didn't know I could play. And then I just got up there and play as good, if not better, than the drummer playing. And then like, wow, you're really good. So then they asked, then they said, hey, bring your drums up. And I go, all right. So I brought my drums up into my barracks room, which was ridiculous. And you're basically in an apartment building with a bunch of other dudes. And I just played drums and people would just come and listen to me play in the hallway. And then that got this kid, Chad Farmer, who lived across the hall from me. He heard me playing and he's like, wow, you're really good. And he had a guitar and he came over and we started playing. And then he introduced me to Will Day, who lived in Knoxville, Tennessee, who was just, a total hippie. Not a total hippie, but he was a redneck hippie, if you will. So, yes. He's from the bowels of Tennessee, and just an overall excellent guy, excellent dude, great friend, and just the nicest guy in the world, super nice family. And I would go visit them in Knoxville. And then eventually, when I got out of the military, I decided, hey, Will, let's start this band. So I moved to Knoxville with Will and his good friend Troy Morris, who is a great bass player, or I was a good guitar player and great bass player. I did everything. And Troy was older than us. He was like 30 and we were in our early 20s. So we played and it was great. And we had a great little trio going. And then we met a couple other people and they started, other band members came on. Chris Voorhees was an excellent guitar player, one of the best I've ever played with. And we formed the band Nellie Bly and played all over Knoxville and recorded some stuff from our own.
Have to play some of those tracks.
Yeah, I definitely will. I'll definitely do that.
And it'll be interesting for the audience to see the difference in style of play with Taboo, and play that against Nellie Bly, and it's totally different.
Yeah, totally different. And the musicianship within. Of course, we were high schoolers in Taboo, so the musicianship was different because these guys were, pretty seasoned players and, been playing for a long time. So they had it was either, but I will say this, when it comes to playing drums and just getting good at drums and getting your chops down and all that stuff, playing on your own, playing with a band and learning how to play with other band members is by far the best way to improve being a drummer. I mean, you can sit down and take lessons all day long, but when you learn to play in a band and learn how to keep the band together and not overdo it, that is the most important thing as a drummer you can ever learn, I think. I think it's the best experience.
I remember I came in from Germany on leave to visit Greg in Tennessee, and I spent 4 or 5 days or whatever it was, and I got to see them play, and extremely impressed I was with that. So that's where Greg was.
Yeah, we were really, really good. That band was still to this day probably the best band and the most fun I've ever had in a band playing, and it was just an incredible experience, and unfortunately it kind of ended sort of it didn't end badly, but it just we kind of the band kind of fell apart a little bit, and guys were going to college, and that was their main focus. And I took the fire department test in 1999. Our cousin Danny Morelli gave me the paperwork on that, and I took the test. So I took the test before I ever moved to Knoxville, so that's how long it takes to get hired with the fire department. Of course, 9/11 happened, and that sped up the process quite a bit. So I went back home. I literally went back home to Fort Myers, and I started working at Sprint with Matt. And next thing you know, I got the phone call. Well, I knew I was getting hired, so I trained my butt off. And that's where I really started to train. I was training with a rucksack with 50 pounds in the rucksack, and I would ride my bike for 30 miles, and then I would run up and down the stairs of the Barbara B. Mann, up and down with my mountain bike that weighed about 800 pounds. And I would do that every day. And I remember I carried a list of all the guys that died on 9/11. That was the one thing I always had in my rucksack, was a list of every guy that died. So I was very, very motivated to do well. And I was very much prepared when I got to the fire department. When I got to the fire academy, I got called in 2003 to take the job, and I was ready to go. And I did quite well. Physically speaking, I did great. And that's where but I learned a lot about physical fitness from the instructors there. They were incredible, the best I've ever had. And I spoke about them earlier. Lieutenant Pete Chrysamilios and Lieutenant Mike Casciola, the two guys that ran that whole fitness unit for years. They ran it for like 15, 8 or 16 years or whatever it was. And I ended up working for them later on in my career, and they're just the best in the business, to be honest. So that's
probably where the modern iteration of your fitness journey really kind of started there. And interestingly enough, while that whole time Greg was talking about, I was stationed in Germany, in Hohenfels, Germany, the Combat Maneuvering Training Center. And I started to get really into weightlifting with my roommate, Ryan Spangler. And, we would hit the gym constantly. All we wanted to do, party and get laid. So all we did to make sure of that was we were the only guys in the platoon or the company to go hit the gym every single day for 2-3 hours. And then we'd go to the tanning booth so that we could, be all, glam boy, muscly glam boy. And I put on a tremendous amount of muscle during that time. And when I came back to visit, Greg in that, he was getting really into his fitness with his training for the Fire Academy. But, at that stage, music for me had been just me. For me, my music experience was listening to the Foo Fighters, and Greg would send me CDs of his band and, the stuff that he was doing. And it was great. But that's kind of where things started to change with Greg's fitness once he got into the fire department. I'll let him.
Yeah, and it did. It did. And then, of course, when you get into the fire department, you after your first year, after probation, it gets a little, you get a little lax, and you don't work out as much, and you eat a lot because there's a ton of food at the firehouse, and they always overfeed you, and there's a ton of snacks. They call it the Seagull. So if you go into a firehouse and they give you the Seagull Award, meaning like you're a bird, that flying around just pecking at shit that's always on the table, or in the snack,
right.
There's always like there's always donuts or cookies or whatever. And you have very little self-control. You're young, your metabolism is high. You can eat that shit and get away with it. But eventually, 4 or 5 years into it, it catches up with you. And it did with me too. I started to gain some weight and I wasn't working out as much. Got married, met Heather in 2004, did a lot of traveling and stuff with her, and just having a good time. Not really worried about really working out and becoming some kind of crazy person. But then I gained a little weight, especially after my wedding. I literally just stopped working out for about a good 6 months. I wasn't doing anything, and I used to ride a bike a lot. I used to run. Do everything, weight train, and I just stopped. 6 months, nothing. And I literally turned into, I'm not a heavy guy, but I weighed around 170 pounds, which for me was really heavy because I'm normally like 150 pounds or 145 pounds. Again, not a huge thing, but my metabolism, that in my eyes, that would be like a 200 pound guy gaining 70 pounds, that's how I felt. So I felt like shit. I didn't feel good. And then that's when I discovered P90X, and P90X was the first big thing that first workout that I was like, I'm going to dedicate my whole entire life to this for the 90 days. I'm going to see if this thing works. And just by the viewing of it, seeing the previews of it and what it was all about, I was sold. I mean, I thought, my God, this is the real deal, because they're not giving you some bullshit. They're just telling you got to work out. You're going to have to literally work out every day for 90 days, pretty much, with very little rest, and, to reach the goal that you want.
It's 6 days a week, and you get the 1 day off.
Right. You get 1 day off, and, and what's crazy is, of course, Tony Horton, as awesome as he is and how silly he is, he's an incredible trainer. The guy knows more about fitness than probably anyone in the world. He's like and
he's also a very good motivator as well.
Oh yeah, great. So I highly recommend that program. Any P90X Beachbody program is great. And I'm not saying that because I don't get paid by them. I used to. I did get into the Beachbody network, which is really smart because they get their people to resell their stuff and make a commission on it. And I did that, and I put a video of my transformation online, which is on my website, runningrummer.com. You can see the transformation I made, and you'll see there was a huge difference. and it's not fake. Like, people are like, oh, but it got 85,000 views, that video on YouTube, which is insane. And I actually got contacted by Beachbody to do an infomercial, become an infomercial, person or whatever. I got contacted. I never got the call. I got called. We spoke about it, and then I guess they chose somebody else, but which is fine. And mainly because of my video had 85,000 views, so that was the big deal.
What we should do is we should talk a little bit about what's encompassed in the P90X program. And people at this stage, probably most people have heard of it. And he's got several other programs since then. But I think the original P90X program is by far the best. It incorporates every single style of exercise you could possibly imagine. You've got weightlifting, you've got calisthenics, you've got yoga, you've got plyometrics. What am I missing?
The only thing it doesn't have, obviously, is there's no time for cardio. And if you're going to do P90, I mean, you could do cardio on top of
plyometrics. I would say plyometrics is a cardio.
Oh, yeah, that is a cardio workout. I'm saying there's no running. Like, it's not like a running program.
No, there's no long distance. But I will tell you this. If you want to get into running shape, if you do a 90-day program of P90X, you're going to be just fine when you do a 5K.
Well,
you may not do your best time, but you're going to be really good at it.
And that's honestly what got me into into just running more, and then ultra running was the fact that I accomplished P90X, and I made this huge, tremendous difference in my physique and my overall health. And I thought, wow, I could do anything. And then I met, my lieutenant in my firehouse. His name is Scott Cassis, and he was an ultra runner, and I had never even heard of ultra running. And next thing you know, he said, hey, you want to come run this 50K with me? And I'm like, 50K? How many miles is that? He's speaking, gibberish to me. And, being in New Zealand, you know what that is. But 50K is about 32 miles, about 31 and a half miles. And I thought to myself, how far is a marathon? He's like, that's 26 miles. I was like, you want me to run further than a marathon? So I said, sure, fuck it, why not? So I signed up for that 50K with no experience in running long distance at all. And I got into that, and he brought me, we went out to, I think we were in, I forget which, I think it was the Seneca Creek was the name of the race, and it was in Maryland. And we drove down and we ran it. And I stuck with him in the beginning because it's in the trails and mountains. Most ultra running is done in the trails and the mountains. And it wasn't the mountains, but it was a hilly area. It was like the lowlands of the Appalachian Trail. And I ran with him for the first 6 miles. And then he's not a fast runner, but he can run forever. And he said, hey, look, just go, man. If you feel comfortable, just get going. I'm like, really? I'm kind of afraid to go off on my own because I didn't know what was going to happen. I wanted to be attached to him because I had this umbilical cord thing. Like, I didn't want to leave him because I thought I would fail, and then I would be really screwed. But I said, fuck it, all right, I'll go. And I just started running. And next thing you know, I remember, feeling kind of turdy around 15 miles. And then I felt better. And then I felt shitty again around 20 miles. And then I felt better. And then I all of a sudden feel better. Then I got to 26 miles. And I remember there was a point in the race where it said 26.2 marathon. And I thought, wow, I just ran a fucking marathon, without.
I think where you find out being fit is half the battle. But the other half of the battle is that it's a complete and utter psychological mind game.
Yes.
That you have to fight your own brain and convince yourself that you can push yourself further. That's something I'm sure will be a segment that Greg will have.
Oh yeah, there's a whole thing, and
Dave about the mind game.
Yeah, and David Goggins gets into it. If you don't know who he is, check out my website. I have a great interview with him on there. Talks about the 40% rule. When you think you're done, you're not even close. You're not even close. Right. There's so much more to go.
Well, I want to. There was a reason. I don't know if we have what's called the Commonwealth Games, which is basically the old British Empire countries get together and they basically do an Olympics.
Right.
And they had a marathon. This time the marathon, just touching on the psychological aspect. They had their marathon in Gold Coast, Australia, which is close to where I used to live in Brisbane. And it was the day they held it, the temperature was in the 90s, right? So you had all your typical marathon runners from all the running countries and now so on and so forth. But this was the first year since like in 45 years where a runner from Scotland was able to potentially win it.
Wow.
Now, again, the race started in the morning, but it was an enormously. If you've ever been to Gold Coast, Australia in the summer, you'll know what I'm talking about. The temperatures are outrageous. So this guy's running, and it gets to the last couple miles of the race. He's in a pack of 4. He's leading it, this Scottish guy, and he's in perfect form. Absolutely perfect form. It looked like he just took off. He broke away from the pack. Then 2 miles before, 2 kilometers, which is even shorter, 2 kilometers from the finish line, he started wobbling. You can see it. And he crashed against the side. I mean, this guy took a spill that it looked like he would have killed himself. And what did he do? And now, in the rules of a marathon, no one from the outside
can help you.
If you're going to stay in the race, you can't touch this guy. I mean, they were on a bridge in Gold Coast, Australia, in the middle of the heat. No other people, nobody's on, and he's just laying in the middle of the tarmac. She's just laying there like he got knocked out. But he rests for about 5 minutes. He gets up and he runs again. But then he crashes again. I mean, his body was just literally eating itself. He didn't win. He came so close to winning. He actually had to drop out of the race because his body just completely quit on him. But for an entire, but being in that condition, the man still got up and did another kilometer based purely on his will. His mind, and nothing to do. His body was shot. There was no body. It was just his brain that got his ass off. And it was a shame, it was a tragedy to see, they almost were able to win it again after 40 years for Scotland. And keeping in mind, this guy was training in Scotland, which isn't a very warm place at all. So he was not used to this kind of environment, which is probably a good idea if you have the money and the time. If you're going to go compete in a marathon in a place that is a completely different environment than you are in, you should go spend about a month there before you run that race, training in that environment so that your body gets more used to it. But that's a separate thing. But, it all goes there. It's all about your mind.
Absolutely.
And it works the same way with P90X because to get through these workouts, trust me, they're hard. And Greg introduced me to P90X, so he influenced me. I influenced him to music, but he influenced me to fitness after I already influenced him to fitness. So it's kind of like this back and forth thing. But he gave me P90X, and I got into it. And I got to a point when I got married, I just gave up on fitness as well. But I ballooned up. I put on a lot of weight. I was up to about 202 pounds.
Well, you had that. Well, not to mention you were a big muscle guy before that. So when you have a lot of muscle on your body, and then that's the danger of being a big muscle guy, is when you let it go, all that shit turns to fat, and then you're screwed.
So what happened to me, I was 200 pounds. First child had been born. And I remember right after her first birthday, I said, that's enough. I looked at myself in the mirror. I said, enough is enough. I mean, I could be wearing a B cup right now. I'm like, what the hell's going on? So, I was watching Greg with the P90X and saw his transformation, and I did it. I decided, okay, I'm going to do P90X and I'm going to run. I'm going to do both. And this is what I did. They have a day for P90X where you have yoga. But the yoga program, it was the one critique of the P90X original program.
It was too long.
It was too long. It was an hour and 15 minutes. Or
hour and 45 minutes.
Hour 45, yes. It was like unbelievable. So after doing a few of them, I said, F this. I'm not doing the yoga. I'm just going to run that day. And I worked it out where I would do P90X one day, run the next day. P90X the next day, run the next day. And initially I couldn't, but I went from 202 pounds down to 160, and I was in the best shape of my entire life. I couldn't believe the transformation. And that's when I started getting into obstacle course racing because I wanted to do something else besides, I've never done an actual marathon. The longest I've ever run is a half marathon. But then I did a 12-mile obstacle course race with the Spartan, and a 12-mile obstacle course race where you're trying to be competitive is the equivalent of a marathon.
It is, and I've done that same distance on the obstacle, Spartan, and that is true. It is definitely equivalent to a full marathon. You feel pretty shitty after that.
You do, but to get to the shape you need to be to compete. I think I can't. When I did my first Spartan, in my age category, which was 40 something, whatever it was. I came in 5th place out of about 300 other people that were in my same age category. So I thought that was a great thing. But what I loved about what I love about obstacle course racing is that it forces you to train your entire body, most importantly your core. And one day Greg's going to have to do a podcast based completely on working out your core.
Yeah, very important.
If you want to be a good runner, you have to have a strong core, because you'll never make it.
Which, by the way, and I know Mike said that he skipped the yoga part of it, but I will say this about yoga: it's essential to not just being a good runner, but having longevity as a runner. You have to do yoga, and I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I didn't believe that.
As a person, interestingly enough, they did an interview with Tony Horton, or he does his own podcast and things. One of the things he always says consistently was, if I had to give up every single workout I've ever had that I could do, and I had to pick one, he goes, I would only do yoga.
Yep, he's 100% right.
That to him is more important than all of them combined.
Right, because it's not just about, the yoga is not just about being this, yogi guy, stretching and doing whatever. It's so important to turn your brain off for a few minutes, and just not think about anything other than where you are and what, your existence, what you represent, what you are, how you.
I'll tell you what, you want to sweat? Do Tony Horton's yoga.
Oh yeah, and well, actually, Tony Horton's yoga is very difficult. Although I will say this, there are much better yoga programs out there than P90X Yoga. P90X Yoga is not the, it's not the standard of like great yoga by any means. I mean, it's good, it's fine. I like it, but Heather's a huge yoga person, and she's like, this is crazy.
It's for a certain purpose.
Right. It's more.
Tony Horton's yoga is to build core strength.
Right, it's to build core strength. It's not, like the yoga that I do nowadays is I'll do 15 to 20 minutes of yoga a day before I start my workout. And I have it up on my website, actually. My current program right now, which I'm going to be updating that every couple weeks on what I'm doing, just to show people what I'm doing. And if you want to follow it, go ahead. By no means, it's not a doctor, written thing or whatever, but I'm not a certified personal trainer, but you can look at what I do and see what I'm doing and try to emulate it, or cut down on the miles, or cut down on the amount of reps that I do. You don't have to do rep for rep what I do, but I implement the yoga part of it because I think it's really important.
One person that I do know that is actually a yogi. She's trained for years in India. She was a civil engineer that worked with my ex-wife, and she quit it to become a yoga instructor. And she went the full deal. And she is actually keen to get on our podcast and have a chat about what she does and the programs that she runs. She's quite amazing, and we'll link her website and that sort of thing. She gives out great workouts online in terms of yoga. But she's the real deal. And, I don't think you can find a more legitimate yoga person than someone who's trained where yoga was invented.
That's legit. I have a friend like that as well. That's one of Heather's friends from Ireland that's been to India as well and has become a yogi, a certified real yoga master or whatever, one of these like Jedi people that can lift fucking cars with their face or whatever. But,
right.
But actually, the only time someone's ever died from yoga, did you ever hear about this, Mike?
No.
There was a lady in a yoga class that bent over and was doing she bent back to get her legs behind her head, right? And it was a pretty packed yoga class, and she let out the most extreme fart and killed the lady in front of her. Did you ever?
What?
Just destroyed her. I mean, blew her whole back away.
If you want to laugh,
it's amazing. It's incredible. I love it. It's my favorite part of yoga, actually.
Yeah, well, we'll have to link some comedy stuff with some outtakes of yoga classes where people fart, and it's like live on TV.
What's always fun to do what drives people crazy is when there's a fart nearby you in a yoga class, and then you waft it in your own face, like as if you did it, and you're smelling it, like just
you can't move.
You can't move.
It's like waterboarding.
No, like you're the one who you didn't fart, but the guy next to you did, and then you just pretend it's yours, and you're like wafting it, so everyone around you thinks you wafted it.
It's ridiculous. But so there are some. Hey, look, there have been times where I've done long distance runs where I've got to the point where your bowels let go, And
oh yeah, I have all. I have so many stories about pooping on runs that I will. There's so many great funny stories where I've been. Prospect Park, by the way, in Brooklyn, where I used to live, is littered with my feces.
Yeah. And the same thing when I had to take a dump in the woods like a bear one time when I was doing a 12-mile run. This is in Australia, and I took it. I didn't have a lot of time to make it inconspicuous. I just did it where I did it, and then every time I ran, it was still there. So I'd always go by my feces every time I would, and I'd just run. It was great. There's another funny story where I did they do the Masters Classic. It's a sporting event they do every couple of years here in Australia and New Zealand, where you compete in your age category for whatever event. And they've got all kinds of events like the Olympics, and I would always pick the half marathon. And they had us do our half marathon on a place called Rabbit Island, close to Nelson, New Zealand. And on this island, there is a sanitation sewage plant. And you'd have to run by it, and you'd have literally a half a kilometer of the smell of everybody's feces from the South Island of New Zealand.
Well, sorry to interrupt you, but what's crazy about that, what's funny, is that the fire academy is on Randall's Island, right next to the biggest shit plant in all of New York, and it smells like poop half the time you're there. Like if the wind is blowing that way, you literally smell shit for like 6 months.
Right. And you got to run through it, and you try to compete, and it's not cool. But anyway, those are those kinds of things.
That's how great my job was at the fire academy with the fitness unit. That I literally went to work next to a shit plant to be hanging out with those guys. That's how good that job was. Like, what job is so good that you decide, you know what? I'm gonna go work next to a shit plant. Because it's so good. That's how good it was.
Yeah. So, but feces aside, Greg is now has a lot of long distance runs under his belt, and he's got lots of biking events that he's done. And Greg is one of those guys that's never not going to be in shape for all that long. If he takes a couple months off here and there, it's usually because of an injury sustained. It's not because he doesn't have the motivation to do it. But he's got a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge on it, and he certainly guided me in my running and influenced me. I've got to get back into it again. I'm at that stage where I've been taking some time off. Once you get into it, it's just starting it. You just have to understand. Most people when they join a gym and they go for like 2 weeks and then they get their muscles sore and then they don't go back anymore.
Yeah, that's really it. I did the Murph workout the other day, and I did it in 29 minutes, which is a really good time considering I didn't do it with a vest. So sorry everybody, didn't actually use the 20-pound vest. I didn't have one, but that would add some at least 10 to 12 minutes onto your time. But with that being said, I got sore. I got really sore after that because I don't do a lot of squats, and I got destroyed. But I tell you what, this week running, the week after that, I had a slow week. I ran in only maybe 20 something miles last week, and this week I'm feeling great. I'm feeling amazing. My legs feel great. I'm running like a champ right now. I can run for. I'm feeling really good. So. I think that really helps. And that's what you got to do. You just got to get past that point, and you just got to know that you're just going to keep, you're going to keep hitting those uncomfortable places in life. In general. That's why running is such a good metaphor for life, but you're going to get uncomfortable and good. You should be uncomfortable. Like who the fuck are you not to be uncomfortable? You should be, being uncomfortable is what makes you grow. If you're uncomfortable, if everything is comfortable, then what the fuck are you doing?
Growing.
You're not growing. Like you're not doing anything. So
now, speaking of the Murph workout, which Greg will describe what that is in a second. Somebody who does that as well, and is also one of the cast members of P90X and a fitness guru unto himself. His name is Bobby Stevenson. Anybody who's seen the P90X series knows exactly who I'm talking about. Probably one of Tony Horton's best friends. I think he was his best man at his wedding a couple of years ago. I've been in contact with him. I'm going to try my best to get him to come on our show, speak a few minutes about his experiences and his time with Tony Horton. It's in the works as we speak, so but we're going to see about
that'll be cool.
That happen. And Greg might be able to get Mr. Karnazes on if he.
Oh, Dean Karnazes, yeah. I'm hoping I'd like to, because I've met Dean Karnazes on a run one time, and he was just such an excellent person. And that's another reason. Going back to Scott Cassis and my lieutenant, Scott Cassis, who is one of my best friends, who got me into ultra running. He introduced me to the book Ultra Marathon Man, which I don't even know if you've read that, Mike, but you got to read that book.
No, I haven't yet. That's one that
read that shit, because that's going to change your life. And you read that, and it just motivated me to become an ultra runner. And we're going to get into other stuff about ultra running too. Some of the detrimental things that can be done as an ultra runner, and some of the I don't run ultra, just so everyone knows, I'm not running an ultra marathon every week. That's not happening. I'll run maybe 2 ultra marathons in a year, sometimes more if I have the time. It's such a monumentous thing to prepare for. But I could run an ultra marathon tomorrow if I wanted to. I could just get out and start running, but that doesn't mean I'm going to do it. But anyway, Dean Karnazes is just, he's like the spokesperson for ultra running, and I really hope to get him on the show, because he was such a nice guy and down to earth, and he's the spokesperson for North Face, and just a good overall guy, Now,
a couple of years ago, he actually did an interview on the David Letterman show. He himself wrote a book that Greg is talking about, and he was talking about the amount of mileage he was doing at that time. This is a few years back, but he was doing something in the neighborhood of about 200 or 300 or 400 miles a week.
Well, no, he was doing. And I want to correct you. He was doing. He's done some crazy shit. But what he did on David Letterman, when he ran 50 marathons in 50 days. So basically, every single day he was running 26 miles. So that's about me. The human body really, you don't want to push yourself more than over 150 miles in a week is insane. So, that's crazy for even ultra runners, 150 mile week. Normal ultra runners are running, somewhere in the range of about 60 to 70 miles a week. That's probably professional, marathoners and ultra runners, and then the average normal person's running, regular human is running anywhere between 20 to 40 miles a week, somewhere in there. So
now, but to continue with Dean's story, what he was saying on David Letterman was he did run a 200-mile race once, and he was running it, and he explained that what he would do is he'd bring his credit card with him, because when you're running that kind of mileage, any kind of calorie intake is good. He would literally, and a cell phone, and he would order a pizza while he was running. And based on his pace, he would tell the pizza guy where to show up. Mile marker 6 or whatever it was going to be.
Yep, he'd have him meet him on a corner, and he would
meet him on the corner, and he'd get the pizza from him, pay for the thing, and then he'd just eat while he was running. He also explained that he got to a point where he fell asleep while he was running, and his body was so mechanically inclined to run that he ran a bit while he was asleep.
He's sleep running. I mean, this guy's accomplished everything from every old, and he's by no means is he the fastest runner to ever exist, because he's not. He's just a great runner and a great spokesperson. So that's why he is who he is, and that's why guys respect him for what he's done. And he's done some insane things. I mean, just 200 mile races, 250 mile races. He's raced a marathon in every single continent. He's run 50 marathons in 50 days. I mean, forget it. This guy is what hasn't he accomplished? So.
Right, and he's no spring chicken.
No, not anymore. And he's in his, I guess he's in his 50s now at this point, and I ran with him for a little while in that North Face race, and I wasn't in the greatest shape on that. Which again is another reason why I give big, huge kudos to my good friend Scott Cassis, because he called me up one day last year and said, "Hey, And I hadn't been running anything as far as like, I was coming off of injuries and I wasn't really in shape to run an ultra marathon. And he called me up and said, hey, you want to go run this race in Massachusetts? It's a 50K. And I said, you know what? I got to work the next day. And he's like, no, you don't. Just take off. So I just took off that day and I went to work. I just went with him up to that race and I ran it. I didn't have a great performance, but I fucking finished, and I met Dean Karnazes, and that was cool. So, ultra marathoning is not about how fast you run. I mean, for the most part, for most people, it's about finishing, just finish, So, but anyway, guys, so we're going to wrap it up. If anybody has any questions or anything like that, and you want to shoot us a message, you can reach us at GregTheRunningDrummer@gmail.com. You can also reach us at our website, which is runningdrummer.com. Facebook, Running Drummer. Just look up The Running Drummer or Running Drummer on Facebook, and you'll find us. But the best way is the website to get in touch with us. And look at the website. I'm building it. It's really cheesy. It's not anything special. But I update it as often as I can because I'm controlling it. And then it'll get better. And then I'm going to upload all this stuff to podcast, to iTunes, and then also to YouTube, and also SoundCloud and all the other stuff, so you can listen to it pretty much anywhere.
Yes.
But Mike, thanks for joining us. And Mike's going to be a huge part of this, and I plan on having him as a co-host, if you will, for the most part on most everything if he's available. Mike and I will be recording this around this time and hopefully have some good interviews coming up.
Definitely. And we'll be talking about a lot of different subjects too as we evolve. Most of them center around music, drumming, and fitness and running. But we'll be open to speaking about other things as well, because we've got a lot of opinions about a lot of things. So keep tuned.
Yep, stay tuned, everybody. So thanks, guys. Remember, runningdrummer.com, and that we're brought to you by Comlink Total Solutions. Check them out at comlinkbundle.com. Thank you guys very much, and we'll see you next time.